Sometimes it just hurts to actually talk about your rivals in such a way that you're going to spout nonsense and you're going to spout anger towards them. And the fact of the matter is that for me, talking about my rivals in a positive light makes me go ick. Regardless of that, for baseball, you know, as a Blue Jays fan, talking about the Yankees in a positive way makes me go ick. As a Toronto Raptors fan, talking about Vince Carter and the Brooklyn Nets and talking about the Boston Celtics and a few other teams make me go ick, especially Cleveland. For the Patriots, talking about the Dolphins, Bills, and Jets, and even the New York Giants makes me go ick. But of course, for hockey, it's like, what makes you go ick? Well, as a Leaf fan, you know that it's got to be talking about the Ottawa Senators in a positive light because Ottawa just doesn't have much sense. And with everything. So, talking about Ottawa in positive is always going to make me go ick, but that's the way it goes. So, anyway, let's talk about the Ottawa Senators and let's talk about their best chance in the modern era to do something about it. Thanks. Hello out there, we're on the air. It's Cutter with NHL time. Tensions blow, the whistle blown, and the pucks go down the ice. Some teams just want to win the cup and do it with a smile. Hey, that is cool. Up on the River Nile. Oh, the good old hockey game. Who will come out on top? Will a team get through the cup to the cup by any means necessary? Oh, the good old hockey game. It's the best game you can name. And I'm have no shame. I will simulate those hockey games. Woo! So we come upon the 2017 season for Ottawa. That's what we're going to be talking about. But anyway, let's talk about the Ottawa Senators franchise history. The franchise known as the Senators actually wasn't the first Ottawa Senators franchise around. That would be in 1917 with the old school Ottawa Senators joining Toronto and Montreal for the first NHL season in 1917-18. They decided to split the season into two, and whoever won each half would face each other in the trip to the Stanley Cup. Because remember, back before 1927, the Stanley Cup would be held between the NHL champions and some Western teams, like the Pacific Coast League and the Western Hockey League, and all that. So they had to guard their honor. The NHL did well with only one fumble in 1925, but still, it's a pretty good fumble. Anyway, the Ottawa Senators were pretty good, winning 4 cups in the 1920s, and they were dominant and all that. So anyhow, Ottawa seemed good with like some great players like Cy Dennehy and Parent Broadbent and Clinton Benedict. The fact of the matter was that the Senators would practically be dissolved by 1935 after it was apparent that the Great Depression just wasn't working out for money wise, and Ottawa, being the capital of Canada, just couldn't do it. So after 1934, the team left for St. Louis, and then that team folded. And so hockey in the nation's capital would actually be non-existent. Well, you had the OHL team, you had some minor league teams in Ottawa, but the fact of the matter was that no professional teams in Ottawa, except for that one year in the WHA, but they ran out of time and money and had to play their playoff games in Toronto, and that's when Toronto picked up that WHA team and called themselves the Toros. So anyhow, Ottawa got an expansion team in 1990 when they and Tampa were announced as the teams that would come in the league in 1992 in time for the NHL Centennial Cup season. It was a given for Ottawa. I mean, they had to have an arena deal and all that. They had to have the $50 million because things in the NHL were different now. Because they didn't want expansion teams to fold or relocate every freaking couple years. So Ottawa did their job and they got the team. They had this cool logo with Ottawa Senators incorporating the Peace Tower into the A for Ottawa. But unfortunately, because of the fact that, you know, the Peace Tower, the government was not too happy with it. They had to change the logo to kind of look like the Trojan Man and all that, which was kind of awkward. So anyway, Ottawa had an expansion draft which was full of crap. Their laptop broke down. 90s laptops were less powerful than 2020's laptops, like you see with my stuff. But the fact of the matter is that the Senators ended up with some bad moves in the expansion draft, and then they finally got into business. Their first game was against the Montreal Canadiens at the Ottawa Civic Center, which held 10,000 people, even though it looked like it was crammed in and all that. Nevertheless, Ottawa beat Montreal 5-3, and the paper said Rome probably was built in a day. For Ottawa, that would be the high water moment of the year, as they kept falling and falling and would only win 10 games in that 1993 season. Rumors were circulating that Ottawa tanked the last few games to get the services of Alex Daig. Well, the joke was on Ottawa when Daig became a massive bust, and the number 2 pick was Chris Pronger. Ottawa couldn't get it out of their own way. They were having issues, but they steadily improved, and they got to the Corel Center, now called the Canadian Tire Center. And in 1997, they went to the playoffs for the first time in franchise history, well, modern history, of course. And then they took on Buffalo, lost in 7 games. It was a tight series, but the Sabres won. The Senators would win their first playoff series the next year against the number 1 seed New Jersey Devils, but Washington swept them out of the building. And then they would face the Leafs 4 times in the next 6 years. So the fact of the matter was that, yeah, had to bump into each other. But the fact of the matter was that, the Sens just couldn't get past the Leafs in the playoffs. In 2003, no, they didn't face it. Sorry, 4 times in 5 years. What am I thinking? Because they didn't face each other in 99. Regardless of that, Toronto had Ottawa's number in the playoffs and all of that. The one time that Toronto and Ottawa did not face each other in that span was 2003 when the Sens were the best team in the NHL. I mean, the Eastern Conference. And the Leafs lost the first round to the Flyers. So the Leafs would be out of the way. Ottawa was supposed to take care of business and go to the Stanley Cup Finals, but they lost in Game 7 on home ice to the New Jersey Devils and Jeff freaking Friesen. The Ducks would hold the Devils to 7 games. Anyway, the Senators would bounce back, and by 2007, they won the Eastern Final against the Buffalo Sabres. Controversially, because NBC was supposed to broadcast Ottawa Buffalo Game 5, but they cut away from overtime to have pre-race stuff for the Preakness, which is like pre-race. Can't you just cut that down? It's not the actual race. But they couldn't. But Ottawa ended up falling in 5 in the finals to Anaheim, Chris Phillips' own goal notwithstanding. Ottawa kept trying to build on things. They had Dominik Hasek for a while. They had Jason Spezza, Danny Heatley, even Jonathan Cheechoo, which was a massive bust of a trade. As Milan Mahalik would do much better in San Jose. The Senators would have some on-again seasons and have stories like the Hamburglar, Andrew Hammond come into play. The Senators then would, be decent, but then they would have a playoff drought from 2017 till 2025 when they finally made the playoffs and got to face the Leafs. Of course, the Leafs took them out in 6, but who cares? Anyhow, let's talk about the 2017 Senators and their best chance to make the Stanley Cup Final. Anyhow, so the 2017 Ottawa Senators, it was the 25th season of Ottawa. It was the silver anniversary. The Senators made a massive rebuild. A lot of people said they weren't going to make the playoffs, which they did. They made the playoffs and got to the conference final. They were losing to the Penguins. As of 2025, this is the only time in the post-Daniel Everson era they've been close to playing the finals. The Suns made the finals in 2007, like I said. and they were about to face the Ducks. They were close to a rematch with the Ducks, but that's actually false because everyone knows Nashville won the 2017 final. Yeah, there was a lot of ice issues. Attendance at Canadian Tire Center dropped during the regular season. So they had some problems and all of that. Brian Murray resigned as GM. It was replaced by Pierre Dorian. Dave Cameron was fired, and Guy Boucher was added in as coach and all that. The Sens would retire Danny Elvis as number 11, making him the first modern player to have his number retired and all that. It would be the second number to be retired. The number 8 was retired for Frank Finnegan, who played for the original Ottawa Senators in the 1920s and was instrumental in trying to get the team an expansion franchise. And then he died months before his jersey was retired. Anyhow, they opened up the regular season and all that. They did all that. Ottawa would have to wait till December 2017 to host what they call the NHL 100 Classic, the Centennial Classic, between the Senators and Canadians. All that. They went to Montreal versus Ottawa, but that wasn't for the season. The Senators were having issues and all that. There was a system. There was a payroll systems issue for government Canada employees, lack of support for Francophone fans, and they didn't like the owner and all that. Anyway, Ottawa clinched home ice advantage on April 8th. They would play the Boston Bruins in the first round. This would actually be the first time in 90 years Ottawa and Boston would meet in the playoffs and all that. A lot of people thought Boston was going to take care of Ottawa quite quickly. And a lot of people thought so too. But I had a hunch Ottawa was going to beat Boston. I mean, after all, both teams were rivals of mine. But I went with Ottawa for the heck of it. Dan Phaneuf scored an overtime goal. Clark MacArthur scored an overtime goal, which was big because of all his injury problems. Ottawa won the game in 6 and did their job. They would face the New York Rangers, and I was sure the Rangers were going to take care of Ottawa. The Rangers and Senators had a 7-game series in 2012, but the Senators won in 6 games thanks to J.G. Paschal's 4-goal game in Game 2, which snuffed off the Rangers' rally. Roll that. The Sens were going to go to the Stanley Cup semifinals for the first time in 10 years. They took on the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Penguins were favorite. Ottawa was only the second Canadian team to advance to the conference final in 3 different seasons in the past 20 years. Nevertheless, they would go to Game 7 and fall in double overtime on Chris Kunitz's goal. Pittsburgh would beat Nashville in the Highlighters series, as they call it. So the Senators scored 98 points, second in the Atlantic behind the Montreal Canadiens, who fell to the Rangers in the playoffs. The Leafs got a wild card spot. Man, the Bruins nipped the Leafs for that third spot. It would have been Leafs Senators. One more point by Toronto would have been Leafs Senators. Tampa had 94 points and didn't qualify. I'm actually shocked. In the first round, they hosted Boston in Game 1, lost. Game 2 was Phaneuf's overtime goal. Game 3, they won in overtime. I can't remember who scored that one. They won Game 4, got beaten in double overtime in Game 5, but then went into Boston, won in overtime, and moved on to face the Rangers, winning both games in tight fashion. The Rangers would win their 2 home games. Ottawa won again in overtime in Game 5, but Game 6 was a 2-goal thing. Ottawa and Pittsburgh would fight it out. Ottawa had to win twice at home to force a Game 7, and then lost 3-2 in double overtime on Chris Kunitz's goal. Erik Karlsson was big. Bobby Ryan was big. Derek Brassard was big after leaving the Rangers for Mika Zibanejad. Craig Anderson was the main goalie. Mike Condon would come in too. All that. Craig Anderson was the main goalie for the playoffs. Craig Anderson did win the Masterton for perseverance in hockey because, his wife had cancer and all that. And he had to take time away from the rink Eric Carlson was named a finalist for the Defenseman of the Year, the Norris Trophy, but lost. Eric Carlson would set the franchise record for most career goals, points, and assists by a defenseman in history. Mike Condon would make 26 straight games because of an injury to Craig Anderson. Carlson would set the franchise record for most consecutive games played, and Craig Anderson set the record for goalie wins. A lot of things happened. Chris Neal played his 1,000th NHL game. Dan Phaneuf played his 900th NHL game. New Jersey and Ottawa would pick swap. I don't know if that worked out. The Rangers and Sens made a trade in the offseason. Derek Brassard, my favorite New York Ranger, sent to Ottawa for Mika Zibanejad and a second-round pick. So the Rangers didn't get anything. Pittsburgh traded Mike Condon to Ottawa because they had a goalie problem. They had Matt Murray and Marc-Andre Fleury as well. All for a fifth-round pick. Alex Burrows was traded to Ottawa at the trade deadline from Vancouver. Victor Stahlberg went from Carolina to Ottawa for a third-round pick. And that was it. They got Chris Kelly from the Bruins for 1 year. Draft picks, the Logan Brown. They swapped with New Jersey. Ottawa took Logan Brown, which kind of was a decent move, but I don't think it panned out. So anyhow, what would happen if the Senators did make the finals in 2017 against the Predators? Let's find out. All right, so the Predators and the Senators will face each other. Pekka Rinne versus Craig Anderson. So what would happen if the Senators did go to the final? They had more points than Nashville, so that meant they would be home ice. And Mike Fisher would face his former team. Game 1 would see the Predators win 3-2 as Ottawa scored twice. Ryan DeSingle and Alex Burrows. Victor Arvidsson made it 2 scored, and then Arvidsson again tied it at 2. Overtime at 4:46, Craig Smith from Ekholm doing his job, and not a lot of time for Yoki Paka and Tommy Wingles, Chris Kelly or Frederick Clayson, Andy Potato, Ryan Ellis. Poor Ryan Ellis. Austin Watson. Arvidsson, Rinne, and Burrows. You're 3 stars of the day. Game 2 would see the Senators get something back and win 3-1. Bobby Ryan and Kyle Turris made it 2-0. Roman Josi made it 2-1, and then Mark Stone made it 3-1 for the game. Craig Anderson, the first star, Bobby Ryan and Pekka Rinne, the other stars. 1-1 tie until game 3, when the Predators would go home and beat the Sens 3-1, as Phil Forsberg and Victor Arvidsson scored in the first period. Mark Stone for Ottawa. Roman Josi made it 3-1. Rinne, Josi, and Craig Smith were your 3 stars. So anyway, on to game 4. And what we see is the Senators take control back 3-2. Brassard scored to make it 1-0. Josi and Fisher made it 1-1, 2-1. And then Kyle Turris made it 2-2. And then in overtime, Dan Phaneuf scored. Zach Smith with the assist. So anyway, everyone having fun back home? Anderson, Rinne, Phaneuf, your 3 stars of the game as the goalies. Man, Nashville put 62 shots on Craig Anderson. Rinne 54. I love it. Game 5 sees the Senators win 3-1 as P.A. Parenteau did score for Nashville. Victor Stahlberg and Derek Brassard made it 2-1, and then Mark Stone made it 3-1. So Brassard, Rinne, and Anderson are your 3 stars of the game. So yeah, the goalies have been hot, hot, hot. But does Ottawa win the Stanley Cup in Nashville? The answer is yes. The Senators would have won Game 6 in Nashville and won the Stanley Cup. Mark Stone and Ryan DeSingle score for Ottawa. Nashville got to go by Craig Smith. Fiala tied it for Nashville. Brassard and Hoffman made it through 4-2. Colton Sissons 4-3, and then Romagnosi tied it at 4. Derek Brassard scored at 12:11 of overtime from Ryan and Carlson. So that was a good move for the Senators to get Derek Brassard in that trade. And the Senators would have won the Stanley Cup against Nashville. I would have picked Ottawa. I would have been like, yes. Carlson, Anderson, and Brassard are your 3 stars. Eric Carlson doing his job. And Craig Anderson doing his job. Apparently, it would be the second star. But yeah, Ottawa takes care of Nashville in 6 games. They would have won the Stanley Cup and given Canada a Stanley Cup after 24 years of inactivity. Unfortunately, Canada's streak is at 31 years and counting as of this taping. So we'll see what ends up happening. Hey, I'm Jeff Diamond at Do.